All right, welcome to this week's deep dive. We're tackling British accent and clear pronunciation today, especially how a native speaker might chat about their daily routines.
Sounds fun.
Right. So we've got this excerpt from an English learning podcast script. It's called Learn English with Daily Routines with Special Guest. Ready to unpack it?
Absolutely. Let's dive in.
Okay, so this script, it's a gold mine for anyone wanting to really nail that natural, fluent English conversation, especially with that British flair.
Yeah, and what's really cool is how they kind of weave in these practical phrases right into those routine descriptions. So it's not just vocab, it's like giving learners the tools to actually use the language.
It's so smart. They've got it all structured around morning, afternoon, evening routines, super organized. And they even have a host and a special guest.
Oh, that's nice. Makes it feel more like a real conversation,
Yeah,
which is key for picking up that natural pronunciation, right?
totally.
Yeah.
Hearing how those phrases are actually used helps you get the rhythm, the intonation, all those subtle things that make a British accent, well, British.
Exactly. And they don't just leave you hanging, they actually encourage the listeners to repeat the phrases out loud.
Yeah. Like they'll say, I wake up at time, and then leave space for you to actually say it yourself. Such a clever way to get people comfortable with speaking.
It is. Repetition is key for mastering pronunciation, especially if you're trying to mimic a specific accent. And this script just kind of embeds those opportunities throughout, almost like it's just part of the natural flow.
I love that. And it's not just about the phrases themselves. They actually start by having the host and guest share their own routines, like before they even get into the key phrases.
Oh, that's smart. It's like they're modeling the language, making it relatable.
Exactly. So instead of just saying brush your teeth, they might say, I go straight to brushing my teeth. It shows you how that single verb fits into a full sentence.
It's a brilliant way to illustrate natural sentence structure and word order, which is super important for clear communication.
For sure. And then, bam, they hit you with. Now, listeners, think about your own morning routine. How would you describe it? It's like they're nudging you to actually apply what you've just learned.
Yeah, it's that interactivity that turns passive listening into active practice, which is so much more effective, especially for pronunciation. You got to use those sounds to really internalize them.
It's like having a built in language partner almost. Now they've tackled those morning routines. Let's see what they do with afternoons, all that work or study stuff.
Yeah, okay. So here's where the script kind of expands beyond individual actions, starts exploring language for different contexts.
It's getting more complex, right? So they have the guest, Emma. She works from home and she's using phrases like I sit at my desk, check my emails, plan my tasks, all that good stuff.
Notice how they're layering complexity. It's not just single verbs anymore, they're building towards more detailed sentences.
That's so cool because then you get exposed to more complex grammar. It helps you build that fluency.
Exactly. And then the host contrasts this by describing their commute to an office using phrases like, I leave home around 8:30 a.m. to get to the office, and I take public transport.
So you're getting different ways to express the same idea.
It's clever. Not just expanding vocab, but showing those variations in how people actually talk.
And of course, they sprinkle in those opportunities for the listener to practice, asking, listeners, how about you? When do you take breaks during work or study? It's like a reminder that there's no one right way to structure a day, right?
Absolutely. And it gets those listeners thinking about their own routines and how they express them in English, especially with that British accent they're aiming for.
It's all coming together. They've covered mornings, afternoons, laid a good foundation with those core routines. But there's something really cool coming up how they handle cultural differences. But first, let me ask you as we're going through this, are you picturing yourself using these phrases? Like, What feels most useful for your language goals?
Oh, definitely. I see how this could be really practical. All right, so moving on to those evening routines, the script kind of focuses on like relaxation and getting ready for bed.
Makes sense, right? Our energy kind of winds down as the day goes on.
Yeah, it's a natural progression. So they have Emma, the guest, mentioning things like exercising after work, maybe a run or some yoga, then having dinner around 7 p.m.
Pretty typical evening activities, but perfect for practicing those British pronunciations.
Right. Even with these familiar activities, they're sneaking in those useful phrases like, I like to exercise in the evening, or I have dinner with my family.
It's amazing how just a slight shift in how you say something can make it sound more British, like emphasizing a certain syllable or using a different vowel sound.
Exactly. And this script is a great model for those subtle things. Listen and repeat, and you start to pick up those nuances.
It's like magic. So the host, they mention going for a walk after dinner, then maybe watching some TV or reading.
Again, super relatable. And a chance to practice those longer phrases.
Oh, and they introduce a really handy phrase, I relax by activity.
It's simple, but it lets you personalize it. Talk about what you like to do.
Yeah, it's all about making it your own.
I can totally picture someone practicing with that phrase and saying, I relax by listening to the deep dive. That's what I'd say.
Great choice. And of course, no evening routine's complete without mentioning bedtime. They give the phrase, I go to bed at time, and even have Emma share her usual bedtime.
10:30 p.m. for those who are
This is
curious.
like a healthy sleep schedule. It's like,
Totally. But more importantly, it gives learners another chance to practice those times in their spoken English, which, let's be honest, is something we use all the time.
oh yeah, for sure. Now, here's where things get even more interesting. They go beyond just the mechanics of a routine and start talking about cultural differences.
My favorite part.
Right. It's a great reminder that language, it's always connected to culture. How we talk about our day can be shaped by all sorts of customs and norms. Totally. So Emma mentions that in Italy, people often have a smaller breakfast and then a bigger lunch later.
Yeah. Which is totally different from like the big breakfast, late lunch routine that's common in other places.
It's fascinating how even something as basic as what you eat when due can be so different depending on where you're from.
And it shows how important it is to be aware of those differences, right? Especially when you're talking to people from different backgrounds.
It's all about understanding and avoiding those awkward misunderstandings. Then they bring up Japan, where taking a long, relaxing bath every evening is a big part of their culture.
Which might not even be something people think about in cultures where, like, quick showers are the norm.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
not just about the words, it's about understanding the whole picture.
Totally. Language learning is also about cultural sensitivity.
100%. And of course, they got to bring it back to the listener, right? They ask, are there any unique routines in your culture? Love that.
It's such a good way to get people involved, sharing their own experiences and perspectives.
So they've broken down daily routines, given us all these useful phrases, and even touched on cultural differences. But they don't stop there. They add in some practice questions to help solidify everything.
This is where the real learning happens, right? It's not just listening anymore, it's actually using what you've learned.
They ask things like, what time do you wake up?
Yeah.
And what do you usually eat for breakfast? Simple stuff, but essential for practicing those core phrases.
Exactly. And they even encourage learners to answer out loud, even if they're by themselves. That's huge for building confidence.
I love that they even suggest repeating the answers until they feel confident. It's almost like having a language coach right there with you.
It is guiding you towards that clear pronunciation and natural intonation. And they emphasize that it's totally okay to make mistakes. It's all about practice and getting better over time.
So important to remember that. And I love how they wrap things up by giving the listener homework, suggesting that they write down their daily routine in English and practice saying it out loud.
It's a great way to make it stick, turn it into a habit.
Exactly. So this whole script, it's like a master class in teaching language through a podcast. Engaging, practical, culturally sensitive. It's got it all.
I agree. It's a perfect blend of structure and natural conversation.
All right, we've dissected the script, explored those techniques, and gotten some awesome insights into how to teach language. But there's one last piece to explore: the outro. Let's see how they wrap things up and leave the listener with some final thoughts.
Sounds good.
All right, let's wrap up this deep dive by peeking into the outro of the Learn English with Daily Routine script. You know the outro, it's like that final impression you leave with the listener.
And they nail it. It's short and sweet, but they reinforce all those key points and encourage, further exploration.
Especially for those aiming for that British accent, right?
Exactly.
So they start with those classic thank yous and goodbyes.
Yeah.
The host thanks Emma for being a guest. She says she hopes everyone learned something new.
Yeah, it keeps that friendly conversational vibe going.
It's so important, especially in language learning. It's got to feel welcoming, so people feel comfortable practicing and trying out new sounds.
100%.
And then, bam, they hit you with that final homework challenge, that reminder to write down your daily routine in English and practice saying it out loud.
It's such a good move. Turns passive listening into action, which is like essential if you actually want to learn a language.
And for pronunciation, especially, you got to move your mouth, get those muscles working to make the sounds.
Absolutely.
You've just finished listening, you're feeling all motivated, you've got all these new phrases buzzing in your head, and then they give you this concrete task to put it all into practice.
Love it. It's empowering. You're
Yeah.
taking control of your learning.
They even suggest sharing that written routine with a friend or recording yourself to hear how it sounds.
Oh, that's smart. Get some feedback. Build that confidence.
It's all about communication, right? It's not just about it sounding perfect by yourself. It's about using the language out there in the real world.
Exactly. And feedback is crucial for that.
Okay, so they wrap it up with a goodbye and an invitation to tune in next time, leaving the listener feeling good, like they've got the tools to keep practicing and improving, especially towards that goal of speaking with a clear, natural British accent.
It's a satisfying ending. It reinforces that message. Like language learning is a journey. Even those small steps, like mastering those daily routine phrases, can get you closer to fluency.
So, big picture, what's the main takeaway from this deep dive into the Learn English with Daily Routines podcast script?
It shows how powerful it can be when you combine structured learning with a fun, engaging format. It's not just about teaching vocab and grammar, it's about showing how to use the language, in real life situations.
And they make it fun.
Yeah. And don't forget the emphasis on practice. Listening is good, but you got to actually use the language, make mistakes. That's how you get better. And this script, it's like a roadmap for doing just that.
This deep dive, it's given us some amazing techniques and insights into teaching language. But the exploration doesn't have to stop here. We focused on daily routines, but what other everyday scenarios could be helpful to practice? Like, how would those scenarios change if you were learning American English or Australian English?
It's something to think about as you continue on your language learning journey. Remember, every interaction, every new phrase, it all adds up.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We hope you've got some fresh ideas, feeling inspired to keep exploring the amazing world of language. Until next time.